morning. Good to be with you. Kirsten, you are bald. Who are you kidding? Who are you kidding? Well, hey, my name's Greg. We've never met before, and this is right now, you're about to experience the last Spark Talk of the summer. You could say they saved the best for last. You might also find out this is more of a sparkler than a grand finale, so you can tell me later. I just want to say before we go any further that I'm a little bit nervous about this Spark Talk because one of the things that we really, really believe to our core around here is that on the weekend, we talk to a person that we assume knows nothing about Crossroads. If you're new around here, we don't want to be insiders. We don't want to tell inside jokes. We don't want to do secret handshakes. We want you to feel at home here. And yet today, I'm going to tell the story of how this place came to be. Whether you've been here for 2 days or 2 decades, you're going to find out where you came into this story somewhere along the way. And if you are new, you might look around and you might go, okay, I know Crossroads. They do big, expensive buildings, big, dark auditoriums, great coffee, loud music. I've got them nailed. Well, that would be true on the exterior, but that's not necessarily at all who Crossroads is, because you see, behind all of that, Crossroads has always been and always will be about connecting people to Jesus in a language they can understand. And when that happens, not just stopping at understanding Jesus, but then becoming a part of a community where you can actually be known and you can know others. That's the goal of this whole place. And so right now, I just want you to get the bearings for where you're at, the seat that you're in, the room that you're in, the kids club your kids might be checked into, the stage behind me, all the lights. Everything you see now, everything you're experiencing was the result of a hand of cards. 2 hands, in fact. Poker, 7-card stud. This 7-card stud game had 2 hands. A hand 4, and a hand against. The future of this place and everyone who would ever experience Crossroads Eastside riding on those 2 hands. Now, like any story, we're going to start back at the beginning because story has a way of reminding us what we're about. Sometimes when we're around our family dinner table and our kids go, man, we miss our old school. We miss our old neighbors. Why do we have to move from the west side? We remind our kids that our family is about and will always be about connecting people to Jesus. Making people who feel like they've been given up on, people who God would be angry at them for the rest of their life, reminding them that God's actually for them and he knows them and he's inviting them into a bigger story. And so if it means putting all of our stuff into a U-Haul every 2 years, we'll do that because that's what our family about and our story tells it. That's what our family's about. And in the same way, you need to understand that here at Crossroads, our story reminds us of the value that's been true from day one in 1996, and that this place has been about community. You go back to the beginning, it starts with a group of 11 friends, 11 people who more than anything, they just wanted a place to bring their friends who had given up on church, but they hadn't yet given up on God. And so they did something crazy. They pulled all their money together. They put their P&G careers on hold. They even put mortgages on their home. They put an ad in a journal that was read by pastors all over the country, and a guy named Brian Tome, who was at a little Presbyterian church in Pittsburgh, answered the ad and moved his family here. And back in 1996, they rented out an old auditorium in a place called People's Middle School in Hyde Park. And that Sunday, the first ever services of Crossroads Community Church of Hyde Park happened. Core to the name, Crossroads Community Church, a place that was filled that day because so many people were curious about the idea of church done differently. In fact, I've still seen pictures of pillowcases covering the back of every wooden seat because the F word was carved into so many of them. Those are the beginnings of that place. And you know what? They were packed. That very first weekend, they were packed because people said, man, this sounds like it could be for me. I still hope that there's a God and that he has good things for me, but I certainly don't like what I've gotten when I've gone to church. And you know what? It was popular because this idea started to expand and friends and neighbors started to invite people and said, you got to come check this place out. And so before long, they outgrew that school. And that group of people came together and said, what if we put all of our resources together? What if we could have a place to call our own? And so they started to search. They started to search for a building that could be permanent for them. They heard about an old hardware store in Oakley, across the train tracks from Hyde Park. It was called HQ. By the way, the building that you're in right now was originally an HQ. They saw a building called HQ and they said, okay, we think this would be the perfect place. And so they took a page from the Old Testament where Joshua led the Israelites around the city of Jericho, and they marched around 7 times because God said on the 7th time, I want you to yell and shout, and I'm going to bring the walls of that city down and you can take it. So they said, okay, we're going to do the same thing. Now the only awkward part of this is that HQ was still in business. So you can imagine people there, the ka-chunk thing is going over their checks because they didn't have credit cards in 1996. So ka-chunk, and people are there checking out, and all of a sudden this church is coming around, we're marching, and the automatic doors, 7 times, every time, 7 times. And, people are, okay, this is good. And kids go, no, 7 times. So they did it. You know what happened? It wasn't just that the building was given to them. As they were walking, they prayed that their enemies would be blinded and confused. That core team went to Wall Street to bid on the property. And not only did they get the property, but they found out later that one of the folks missed their flight and another one had wires crossed and didn't show up. And so much so, the next week, those people called and said, hey, we'd love to buy that building from you, and we'll add $1 million to it. God had literally blinded and confused their enemies so that this community could have a home. Crossroads Oakley was born. Now this thing grew and grew and grew, and from the year 2000 to 2008, they got sick of just adding on buildings, and before long, people started to go, man, this is great for me, but I've got friends and neighbors, and the bummer is they're not gonna drive to Oakley to hear this message. One of the first groups of people to do that was in the northern part of the city. And they got together up in Westchester and Mason. They said, what if we did this community? What if we brought it to our friends and neighbors? What if we allowed them to come into the community that we've known, and we did it in their own backyard? And so they started meeting in homes, and they started meeting in basements and having core team gatherings until, in the same way that God had delivered a building called HQ, he started to work some amazing things in the Mason School District. They'd never before really been warm to churches, and yet this time in a Mason Middle School auditorium, they said, hey, you can have any classroom you want for Kids Club. You can do anything you want to our auditorium. We'd love it if you rented out our space. And so Crossroads Mason got its start. Now, the idea of multi-site then was crazy. People go, you're kidding me if you think that people are going to go to a church where they just watch a message on a screen. You're crazy if you think that this whole thing can actually happen in the northern part of the city. But God was doing something because, you see, the bonds of community were much, much stronger than a live message. And I know at this point you're probably going, okay, I thought you were saying you were going to tell the story of this place. Well, it was the group of people in the northern part of the city that caused a group of friends in Union Township to say, hey, we want what those guys have. We want what those guys have. And the cool thing that they had going for them was numbers. Crossroads was about 15,000 people at the time. And 4,000 of those people lived in and around the eastern parts of the city. So they did what Mason did. They got together. They started meeting in homes. One of the homes they met in was the home of Mike and Amy Bull. Amy's now a Reach Out site director. And what I love about this part of the story is that Chris, if I've ever had a man crush, it's probably Chris Bull when he plays electric guitar up here. The dude is unbelievable. At the time of this meeting in 2008, Chris was 12 years old. And he had just taken his first guitar lesson from a local musician called Freak Bass. That's how the pieces of this story are woven together. And so they're meeting in homes, and they say, hey, we should get a building. We should look for a place for this community to come together where we can meet, where we could do life together. So they started the search. They looked high, they looked low, and they found what used to be an old Kroger at the corner of Beachmont and 5 Mile. Kroger had moved across the street. It was being used as a Steinmart, and word was Steinmart was going out of business. And so what'd they do? They said, we got to march around this place 7 times. That's a secret thing to do. So this time it was a little bit more under wraps. Brian called some people and said, hey, under the cover of night, don't tell anyone, we're going to go and we're going to march around this place 7 times. We're going to ask that God would have favor. We're going to ask that the community would want us there. We're going to ask that our offer would be looked upon favorably. So under the cover of night, they walked around that Anderson Kroger 7 times. You know what happened? I bet it's not what you think. The offer was accepted. The offer was accepted. This is it. This is it, the beginning of a Crossroads on the east side of town. This is amazing. And all those people who had gathered together in homes and all the people who had hopes riding on their friends and neighbors, being able to experience Jesus in a language they can understand without having to go to Oakley, it was realized for about a month until Kroger came back and said, hey, Steinmart wants to stay. We have to withdraw the approval of your letter. Can you imagine the wind that would leave your sails if everything you had been about up to this point was about getting a site of your church for your people to experience, and all of a sudden it's like the rug got pulled out from under you? To make matters even worse, a little less than a year later, a going out of business sign went up on Steinmart and Anderson. Imagine that. Imagine that. Only this time, that group of people said, we don't need a building. We don't need a building. We can do community. We can do all the things that Crossroads does. We can do that without a building. A leader stepped up. Her name's Allie Patterson. We know Allie from amazing teaching on this stage. We know her from Podcast for Women, IKR. And Allie said, hey, we're going to do everything that Crossroads does, and we're going to do it wherever we can find space. So they got together, and they did a Go Cincinnati launch out of Turpin High School. They returned Thanksgiving food drive boxes in the Anderson Park and Ride. They got together and they brought back gifts for incarcerated children called Angel Tree, and they did it at the Anderson Government Center. They even did midweek services in a little venue in Eastgate called Receptions. Right there, by the way. You know, because this core group realized, man, we're not about buildings. We're about inviting our friends into something. Now, they would also be lying if they said that a building wasn't important to them, because it was, because it felt like it legitimized your community, and there are just a lot of people who won't really take you up on your invite until you have something to invite them to. And at the time, Crossroads resources seemed to be going everywhere but the east side. Mason was getting a permanent building up on Reading Road in an old paper factory. There was even an old middle school that became available in Cleves, Ohio. And would you believe that Crossroads West Side happened before Crossroads East Side? It's part of this story. In fact, every single corner of our city got a Crossroads before this one was here. And so you just wonder, man, at what point did those people just sort of lose steam? And, you know, I think it was somewhere around that time where they said, look, we can only do this for so long. Are we going to fish or are we going to cut bait? And as far as we could tell from the campaigns and where things were happening, it would say, we've looked high, we've looked low. We've looked from 32 to 50 to Beachmont, and we don't see anywhere that could house the number of people we would need in an auditorium. We don't see anywhere with the parking that we would need for a site. We don't see anywhere with the traffic flow and the ins and the outs, and it just looks like an East Side site is not in the cards. But then we got a call. I love this part of the story because this is the part where it becomes personal to me. You know, for every one of you, some of you are going, oh, I was there for that. I remember that part. This time was probably the first time ever that we got a call and someone in a community said, we want Crossroads here. In fact, it was Union Township, the building right behind us. They called and they said, hey, we've got some amazing things happening in Claremont County. We've got some amazing things happening in our community, and we know what happens when your community comes to town. We don't know what happens in the building, but we know what happens outside of it, and there's nothing we would love more than a Crossroads on the east side, and we want to make it happen for you. We want to make it happen. In fact, the place that they offered up is not where we are today. The schools were sort of looking at their elementary plan, and there was an elementary called Brantner that they thought maybe this would work for you. If you've ever driven on Mount Carmel back the one-lane drive to Brantner Elementary, you would see immediately, we said, that will not work for us. They said, well, hold on, we've got something else. We've got something else that might work. It's a little bit non-traditional. There's a Hobby Lobby, and it's gonna move across 32. There's a receptions event venue, and they want to focus their business elsewhere. And we think if we piece these things together, we've got a park and ride in the back that could help you get parking on the front. We really think this could work for you. The only catch is it's not for sale. Okay? It's a lease. Okay? And the landlord, his name is Jungle Jim. You know, the crazy part about Jungle Jim is he's a really good businessman. He's a really good businessman, and when he's the owner of a strip mall, he looks for places that bring in a lot of money. And Jungle Jim would say, you know, the only person worse to lease to, right above someone who wants to open a bar with no restaurant experience, is a church. And we're saying, we love your space. We'd love to come in here. And just before he was about to write off, his son said, Dad, we really think that you should consider this one. We've heard of this church called Crossroads, and it seems like they sort of bring people. They might do some good things in our community. And so, he didn't just pass the deal by. He did what he had always done. He's a very shrewd businessman. And he didn't want any opportunity to pass him by, so he did what he'd always done. He consulted the deck of cards. 2 hands, 7-card stud. 1 hand for, 1 hand against. The against isn't that notable. I don't know if this is it. I've got 7 random cards that don't amount to much of anything, and obviously for him, they didn't either. But what's striking is the hand that laid before him that was for the deal for Crossroads to come into a shopping center, because you see, there were 4 natural 9s, and there was a wild, and what Jungle Jim had on his desk was 5 of a kind. He's later reported saying, how do I say no to this deal? I'm terrified of your 5 of a kind God. And you know what? When I called to verify this story, I said, hey, is this whole 5 of a kind thing true? He said, absolutely, it's true. In fact, I've never been able to put those cards in the deck back. They're still on my desk. Is that an amazing story or what? He's a 5 of a kind God. He's a 5 of a kind. The rest is history, man. We had a dedication in this place. We launched the first weekend of January this year. We had 8,500 people that first weekend, the largest launch of a Crossroads site in Crossroads history. And since then, people that you and I know, people that you and I have experienced life with, this community has made people feel for the first time that God maybe hasn't given up on them. Maybe God is for them. We see people get baptized here. We see marriages get saved at couples camp. We see family relationships strengthened. And if I'm honest, I just want to say for a minute that somewhere along the line, the smell of new paint and fresh carpet may have gotten us off our game. Because you see, the thing that's true about Crossroads is never that we have been about buildings. God's blessed us with some amazing, amazing facilities. But the thing that I think has granted favor for us over and over, from blinding and confusing people to a HQ to putting a deck of cards on Jungle Jim's desk for a deal, is that God is crazy about the idea of you getting into community. And I know you're probably thinking, do you really think that God would use a deck of cards to get a deal on the east side? Absolutely. God was speaking to Jungle Jim in a language he understood. And that's why we're here. So, man, I don't know about where you're at right now. Maybe you're in here and you're loving the fact that it's really dark and you can be unknown. And that's fine. This place was designed for you. We want you to be able to hide behind a great cup of coffee in the dark as long as you need to. But I'll tell you a little secret. The people who grow the most around here are not the people with perfect attendance. People who grow the most around here, the people who experience the most freedom, are the people who get into community. And man, I want that for you. I want that for you. This is our church. This is our church. Those are the 400 people that launched this place. And let me tell you, those people would be the church in this building or out of this building because they know that the church is not about a place. Apostle Paul said it really well when he was laying out guidelines for the church. In Acts chapter 2, when we see the church coming onto the scene, he doesn't say anything about buildings, but he does say they devoted themselves to teaching in places like this. But they didn't stop there. They devoted themselves to fellowship, to being with one another, to breaking bread, to praying together. You know, some of the best times I've ever experienced church have not been in this building. Some of my best experiences of church have been with other people who are on the same page and who know the only reason we have a second chance is because of a man named Jesus. And so today, if you're going, you know what, I think I'm stopping short. I want to invite you into community. I want to invite you into something that will change your life far better than 70 minutes in a dark auditorium on the weekend. We've got a lot of ways to do it. Brandon mentioned some of them. Next Steps next weekend, I think, is the best thing we've ever developed to help you believe that you fit here. You fit here, and we want to do anything to help you find your people and your place. Go next weekend. Go next weekend. If it's your first time, you want to declare yourself and say, hey, I want to be in this community. We would love to help fit you around here. Those on-site groups, that's another way we look at community. You know, 6 a.m. every Friday morning, a group of fathers meets. And they meet because they know There's some fathers in here, I hear them. They know that being a dad and being a husband is hard. And so they want to do it in community. There's a group of moms that meets, mainly because there's free childcare, but also because they know that, man, we want to be in community with other moms because this is a thankless, hard job. There's people that are going to meet and put their finances on the table. They're going to snowball debt and say, we don't know how in the world we'll get out of this. But in community, through a small group called Financial Peace, they're going to find freedom in their finances. And all of these things are going to happen in community. So here's the short of it. I don't care what community looks like for you so long as you have it. I don't care if it looks like getting here early with a coffee name tag and brewing coffee so that people can feel welcome. I don't care if it's you're with some buddies in the parking lot, or maybe you're helping kids understand that they connect to God's story. Maybe you're just in a living room somewhere in your neighborhood and you're drinking a beer talking about what you thought of the weekend. That's great because I want you to be known and I want you to feel known by others. And that's what this place has always been about. You know, God went to great lengths to give us this building. He went to great lengths to give us this building, but don't get lost in it. He was never about the building. He was about you. Because he wants you to know that he would move hell to get to you. He would send his son to get to you because God is not just some distant God. God's not just some God who doesn't know you, some impersonal God. Our God is a five-of-a-kind God, and he's crazy about you. God, I pray today that everyone in this room would find community here, that they would be a part of the church, that church wouldn't just be something that we go to, but it's something that we'd be a part of. It's something where we could have relationships. We never thought we could be so deeply known. And for anyone who's been burned by that idea before and thought they were getting community and all they got was judgment, condemnation, God, I pray you'd redeem that. Make this place true to what it's been from the very beginning, back in 1996. It's a promise of community. I pray that for my friends here this morning. In your name, Jesus, amen.